Welcome back. New York is one of about 20 states that have a civil confinement law that can keep sex offenders behind bars even after they have finished their criminal sentences. In many cases, it prevents dangerous and violent criminals from striking again. But it can also cause a litany of problems, not only for the person locked up, but for the facility where that person is kept, and also for the state budget, because it's very costly and taxpayers aren't always getting their money's worth. Now, for the past year, the Journal News has been digging into the law and its ramifications. RFL senior political producer Caryn McBride, she spoke about that with investigative reporter David Robinson, who covers health and healthcare issues.
David, a shocking report of violence, death, mismanagement at this facility, and a huge tab for New York taxpayers. But before we get to the report itself, let's look at how this investigation started. Talk about New York's civil commitment law, which, as you note, came about after a convicted rapist fatally stabbed a woman in White Plains in 2005.
Definitely. So this investigation itself actually started with a unrelated matter, really, the opioid epidemic. We were looking into a case of a psychiatrist who was accused of illegally selling prescriptions for some 10,000 plus painkillers. And from that investigation and the reporting that we did on that, we came across his past career and his time as a psychiatrist treating young teenagers. And one in particular, a 15-year-old, Raul Laguerre in Orange County, and a high-profile criminal trial involving a sexual assault. And from that investigation, from that reporting, we came across civil commitment law and its origins in White Plains, as you pointed out, and delved into some of the complex issues that have sprung from this law, which basically is used to keep sex offenders locked up in a civil confinement setting in psychiatric centers after they've completed their criminal sentence.
Well, let's talk about your report and let's look at some of your findings. You went up to this facility, and the number of violent incidents seems alarming, one a month. In addition to injuries to inmates, workers also have been attacked. Police responded to dozens of times to aid the guards there. In fact, one female worker was punched and throttled. Yet all of this continued to go on without an independent monitor. Now, how can that happen?
This is a state-run facility that was allowed to operate with impunity because not a lot of people are paying attention to this issue. And even ourselves, we came across this reporting on a completely unrelated issue. So the idea is that when people aren't really paying attention, especially members of the media, that people aren't asking questions. And through the Freedom of Information law, that's how we came to a lot of our findings, was that we got the state agency, the Office of Mental Health, to release reams of documents that basically laid out this kind of complex world of violence and death and assaults on both sides, the staffs being at risk, the offenders being at risk, and really taxpayers being at risk because nobody's watching how they're spending millions of dollars inside these facilities. And
talk about the facility itself. You were up there. What did you see when you were inside?
To my understanding, I think I'm the first known member of the media to be inside to conduct an interview, and it was with Raul Laguerre Jr. This was before his most recent trials that determined that he's still going to be confined there indefinitely. But the inside is very similar to kind of any maximum security type setting. You go through razor wire, you go through multiple lock systems, you check in and give up your personal belongings, and they allowed me access to one room. So it was a cafeteria style setting, and the staff and guard members were not as far away as we are as we conducted an hour-long interview.
And you also uncovered administrative flaws and bogus records. One psychiatrist saying he worked there when in fact he didn't.
We came across an individual, Morales Brown, who was a psychiatrist who was falsifying treatment records. He was falsifying time records. He wasn't actually going to the facility. And to be clear, he was actually falsifying treatment records for the general population. So the general inmate population, prisoners at the state prison on the same campus, they're also treated inside this facility, this building, really. And he was just making up that he was working there during hours at a time and not treating these guys, and they were being, cycled back through general population. These guys were being put at risk. Staff members were being put at risk because they weren't getting mental health treatment that this psychiatrist told the state that he was.
And talk about the letters that you read. You got a look at some of these letters from the inmates. allegations of abuse. What did that reveal to you?
Yeah, I mean, these letters are some of them are rambling, long-winded letters from people who've been locked up, essentially their whole lives. Some of these people have been locked up for decades at a time, and they tell the stories that you would expect of people who have long-term incarceration, of abuse by other inmates and other offenders in the civil commitment setting, to allegations of abuse at the hands of the guards and the staff members. And they are filled with despair, pain, suffering. I mean, it's what you would expect from the minds of some of these troubled and mentally ill individuals.
And of course, there's a financial cost here, and that is to the taxpayers of New York.
You're talking $65 million to lock up 350 to 400 individuals. So that's $175,000 plus each in change. So you're talking about spending a lot of money to lock up not that many people. And as the expert at the National Alliance of Mental Illness pointed out, was that that's the first problem. You have to actually start paying attention to how the dollars are being spent. And then you have to start delving into the issues of, well, are there individuals who should be into supervised strict probation setting, which is some $9,000 a year versus $175,000 a year. So you're talking big gaps here and some serious questions with not that many independent eyes on the issue.
What's next now for this psychiatric center?
There's been reports of the Justice Department looking into the facility because of some of the reports of violence and abuse behind the walls. And there's also the issue of the courts. There's a lot of lawsuits that are working their way through the state and federal level involving the facility. So that's where you come into the liability, that if these lawsuits do come to fruition, that we're talking even millions of dollars more from the legal settlements that would be involved in this too. The Supreme Court has said that basically states can decide it themselves. And so at this point, really, it's up to judges like Judge Tormey up in Syracuse, who we quoted and cited from his reports, and others who are taking this on and saying, we need to ask some serious questions about this, and we have to actually start looking at it because this can get out of hand pretty quick. We can start talking about even more individuals being locked up in these facilities and nobody asking questions, and then all of a sudden that tab, 65 million, starts turning into 100 million, starts turning into 150. You start the snowball effect of public policy without the questions that need to be asked.
Well, it's a great story, David. Thank you so much for joining us.
My pleasure.
All right, coming up next, we will shift gears. In fact, we're going to shift all the way to Broadway. SpongeBob, it comes to life on The Great White Way, and legendary theater critic John Simon here with his take, I wouldn't hold your breath for 2 thumbs up. Stay with us.